VoyMonk vlog number 71. On this channel, I think maybe one of the things that one might arrive to if they've listened to this or come upon this channel and the content that I'll do and still have yet to do. Vlog number 71, man. Is that some people kind of wonder, what kind of content, what kind of things do or why don't I do certain things, or why is it certain content that I'm not interested in doing, like politics and things like that. I will say that, and I'll address this in this particular vlog, which I think I've kind of covered a bit, but more specific. And I would say that probably, the biggest reason why I don't really talk about certain issues or topics, things of that nature, for the most part, is because I don't want that to be about what this channel is about, simply because there's so many different places for that are more appropriate, that kind of thing. And I think there's so much of that kind of content that I don't want or feel needs to be that kind of space. But I will say that when I'm not obviously doing this channel and I'm just enjoying content or whatever, and even when it is, even when it comes to watching other YouTubers or vlogs or things like that, I kind of steer away from that for the most part. It's mostly because I really don't like the arguments, or more importantly, I don't like bad arguments, and I don't like bad faith arguments, which aren't necessarily the same thing, but I think they pretty much create the same problem. Meaning that, for example, a bad faith argument is someone who's basically arguing from a devil's advocate place, meaning that they don't necessarily believe what they're saying. They don't necessarily care about the issue that they're talking about. They're really rather just talking about it to either stir up drama or to get a conversation going or to create some kind of interest. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm not particularly attacking that. I'm just simply saying that's what I would consider a bad faith argument. It doesn't mean that it has to be a bad argument. It doesn't mean that they can't be right. It doesn't mean, many times people can be wrong, but it's not actually genuinely made for any real reason. Now, in terms of a bad argument, that's a little different. That's someone who typically unintentionally will make an argument, points and key counters or whatever from someone else's argument, and they'll usually do so in a very bad way. Maybe it's not intentional. Well, usually it's not intentional, but specifically, they're not trying to be malicious. They're not especially trying to be ignorant, although sometimes they can be. So that's why I'm trying to tread a little light and carefully, but just a bad argument. Meaning it doesn't even matter whether I think the argument is agreeable, or I could agree, or I think people can agree. I think you can just simply make a bad argument, even though you, for the most part, have maybe a good position. And I think sometimes bad arguments can hide behind better positions, and I think in the grand scheme of things, I think that also kind of tends to invite the first party that I mentioned before, which are bad faith arguments. And whether it's a bad argument or it's a bad faith argument or actor or whatever, just usually so much regardless to whatever the issue will be, there's just so much that just gets convoluted, and then it just becomes a mess. And then it just doesn't matter what anybody means or their intentions or what they're actually saying. It gets people to take sides. It gets people to, get into drama. And like I said, I'm not necessarily being critical of places or things like that, because I think they can be and probably are important. I just think there's so much of it that it can be exhaustive, it can be tedious. I don't think it's necessarily always the point, especially if an issue is actually one that I think is important, regardless to whether or not a position that one may take. And so therefore, it's really taken a life of its own, especially online, because there's the entertainment value, right? There's the part of it that people want to see blood. They want to see drama and all that. And I just think in the end, for me, sometimes it can be a disservice to whatever issue may be covered. I'll give a last example. Talk shows. Late 80s, early 90s, there used to be a lot of different talk shows. And it isn't necessarily that the talk show format was necessarily bad, but it became disingenuous the moment they became less about substantive issues that people were talking about, which, let's be frank, would either bore people to tears or it would depress them to the point where, I mean, you can only hear so many tragic stories each day out of the week, especially if they kind of tend to be things that cut really deep, if you understand what I'm saying. And then, like I said, ultimately you can only produce so much that there's actually genuine things that are going on to where things are just done for effect. And so the point that I'm making is that at some point, regardless to whatever the issue may be, talk shows just became a part of a circus, a part of a thing to try to... It was less about inclusive talk in a conversation, engaging in any real way, and it just became more about, well, let's see what kind of effect we can get from the audience or the people that are on the show. And by the time, I'd say the mid-90s, what gave way was more like the Jerry Springer and less like, I don't know, Montel Williams when he kind of started out. Like I said, so that to me is the reason why. I mean, and it's not a new thing. Content like that, due to the lack of censorship or this, that, and the other, it's taken on a life of its own when it comes to online stuff. So, like I said, I don't have a critique or criticism about those who enjoy that or people who do that. I just think that it's everywhere. It's overdone. And if I had to make a real prediction going into this next year, I'm betting that maybe I'm not the only one that's kind of exhausted with it already, especially when it comes to a lot of issues that seems to be kind of swimming or, in the last few months and, years. And, maybe people will truly try to find somewhere else to go. May that be, some people call it a bubble, some people call it this or that. I think it's good to engage in things in reality and discuss and have conversations. I don't necessarily think it's so great when they don't produce anything, they're not constructive, and that ultimately just for entertainment, they're about kind of doing a disservice to what should be sometimes real, genuine discussion. So, yeah, hopefully that wasn't too serious. And I went a little over. So, that's the reason why I'm not really a fan of that kind of content. And I'm not looking to replicate that here where it's so many other places besides here. So, sorry this went over. Thanks again. Until next time, take care.